Anyway, this is Sandra Warren, and I met her several years ago when I was just beginning to have grandchildren, and every one of my grandchildren have one of her books, Arlie the Alligator. So Arlie has been our friend for years and years. And now she wrote a book about South High School as well as some other books over there, and all of them are really, really good. So she's a 1962 graduate of South High, so we can all be proud. Look what happens when you go to South High. We'll see. She's going to put on a presentation. Can hardly wait.
How many of you know nothing about what's in the book? Whoa, all right. I'm sorry. One of the one of the big instigators and reasons that I wrote the book is back there raising his hand, but he knows nothing about the book. Anyway, okay. In 1943, it was wartime, and the United States had been in the war since 1941. Actually, it was the fall of 1942. And Mr. Mulder had a civics class, and many of you, I'm sure, remember the weekly reader. We all had those in class, and a lot of people nodding their heads. And it was weekly reader time, and Mr. Mulder got out the weekly reader and was reading this article about what was called the Buy a Bomber program. And the Buy a Bomber program was a program initiated by the United States Treasury Department to help fund the war. World War II ended up costing $292 billion, and 57% of that money was paid for by American citizens buying war bonds and war stamps. And to get American citizens more involved in buying them, they made it more tangible. There were lists of things that you could buy. They, even in the weekly reader, every weekly reader, one after the other had, for a 25-cent stamp, you'd feed a carrier pigeon for a day, and for a 10-cent stamp, you get 3 cartridges for a gun, and boy, that wouldn't go over today, but that was in there. And there were lists of things, and you could buy tanks, you could buy barges, you could buy raincoats, you could buy helmets, and it was all labeled that if you bought this many stamps or this many amount of bonds, this is what it would pay for to help for World War II. And everyone was invested. You had Hitler knocking on the door off of the Atlantic coast, marching through Europe, and you had Pearl Harbor and the Japanese on the West Coast. And everyone, almost without exception, spent their life daily worrying about and being involved in what could we do for the war. And even the little children were, that was really hammered into them. The husbands, brothers, uncles, sons, from 18 to 38 were gone. They were all serving in the military. And so women had gone into the factories. Ford and Chrysler's was converted. I think they were making tanks, and they may have been making bombers, I'm not sure. But everything was geared towards the war. So it was a very different time. The government came up with all these incentive programs, and one was to buy a bomber. And Mr. Mulder was reading the weekly reader on that particular day. It was either the last week in November or the first week in December, and I know that because of all the research that fell into my hands. Everything fell into place. This is a magical book for me. The one thing that eluded me is that weekly reader I bought I went on eBay, I got 80 years of Weekly Reader. I got Weekly Readers all the way up through mid-November and mid-December on. I don't have those 2 weeks of Weekly Readers, and I know it had to be then because of what happened. You see, Mr. Mulder's class, civics class, an 8th grade boy raised his hand, and after Mr. Mulder told him the story, I even told the story, he read about the Buy a Bomber program. And in this program it said that for X amount of dollars you could buy a variety of fighter planes, pursuit fighters, or bombers. You could buy a B-24 or a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber. And but the price tags are pretty hefty. The pursuit fighter cost $75,000. And what it meant is you would sell that amount of money in war bonds, and then you could buy a plane. And if you bought the plane, you could name it, number one, and number two, they would fly it into your hometown, and you could have a dedication ceremony. Well, Mr. Mulder read this story, and there was this 13-year-old boy sitting in civics class, raised his hand and said, Mr. Mulder, why don't we do that? And Mr. Mulder obviously thought it was a great idea, and he said, great idea, Mel, we're going to send you down to Mr. Coryell's office. Well, Mel was a good student, a good young man, had never been to the principal's office, so he said, can my friend Mel go with me? And Mr. Mulder said, sure, take Mel with you. So he and Mel went down to Mr. Coryell's office. The next thing we know is obviously Mr. Coryell loved it because things started to happen pretty quickly after that. The first thing that happened was Mr. Mulder and Mr. Coryell said, hey, it's a mighty big project for 8th graders. We ought to get some upperclassmen involved. So they went to the Senior Student Council and they asked if anyone would be willing to co-chair with Mel and Arthur. And two people stepped forward, Grace Moyer, a young gal, 2 juniors, and Dave Dutcher. And they stepped forward as the co-chair people. Then they decided again, this is a mighty big project. We need to invite somebody else to help us with this. Who are we going to get to help? So they invited a gentleman named Kent Brown, who was he was a 1923 graduate of South High School, but he was the chairman of if I can remember right, the Retailers Association, their war bond campaign. And so he had the marketing skills and the organizational skills to know how do you take these teachers, and by the way, teachers had to collect the scraps, sell the stamps. This was their duty. That was all part of what they did as teachers. And so how do you convert from selling the U.S. stamps to selling the bonds, and how do you make this happen? So he put together a plan, and the first thing that happened was Mr. Mulder made 2,000 flyers that told people how to fill out a bond application, and given to the kids, and the kids took them to around to their family and friends. Now remember, computers weren't even on the radar. Internet wasn't on the radar. The only means of communication, really, the biggest thing was the radio, this great invention. And so you had the radio, you had the newspapers, and you had posters and flyers and things that you would set up around town. My big question when I heard about this incredible story was, how did they do this? And so this campaign was put together that it was basically done word of mouth. Kids went home to their families, they told friends, they told neighbors, they got the businesses involved. There were, I believe, 6 feeder schools. There may have been more, I was trying to remember. But I know there were at least 6 feeder elementary schools. So you had all of these kids and the brothers and sisters and everybody involved that they wanted to buy this bomber. Well, the committee got together and they decided we're going to buy a pursuit fighter plane. I said jets and was reminded that the only people that had jets during World War II were the Germans. At the very end of the war, they brought out this modern aircraft, which was a jet engine. So So I'm going to lose my train of thought because I'm so tired, but that's okay. So they decided they're going to go for the pursuit fighter, $75,000. 3.5 weeks, well, they had an assembly, and Dave Dutcher gave a rousing speech, and Mr. Mulder talked, and Mr. Brown talked, and Mr. Coryell talked, and of course they did the rah-rah, you know, we're from South, I couldn't be prouder, and we can do this, we can do this. And so this was presented to the students, and they went out with great enthusiasm. 3.5 weeks later, the sales were sloughing off. And Mr. Newton, the school treasurer, came to the students again. So we had another assembly. I had another assembly, and he says, okay, kids, if you want this bomber, well, I forgot to tell you, they decided it would take 12 weeks. We can do this in 12 weeks. So they started mid-December, and it was going to end on April 1st. And so 3.5 weeks into the campaign, the kids were losing enthusiasm and things were sloughing off. Had the assembly, got them charged up again and said, you got to bring in at least $6,000 a week if we're going to make this goal by April 1st. Well, apparently this really charged the students up, because by 2 weeks later, they had their $75,000 and they had their pursuit fighter plane. Now, I have a picture of it, which we can scroll through and see it later if you like. It's not clear that the Spirit of South High was ever excuse me. I said Mel asked the question. It was Art that asked the question. I'm sorry. It was my husband's correcting me. See, I told you I was tired. It was Arthur that asked the question. Mr. Mulder, why don't we do that? Okay, so now I've totally lost my train of thought. Oh, the pursuit fighter. We have a picture of the Queen. Of course, you know, in high school you don't do anything without a Queen in their court. But we have a picture of the Queen. Here, may I have your book a second? We have a picture of the Queen and her court in front of the pursuit fighter. So we know there was a pursuit fighter, but there's no indication. It's on page 27. There's no indication that there was ever a dedication ceremony or that anything was ever painted on the plane. And I think, this is only my conjecture, I believe it's because the committee got together and said, wow, look what we did in 7 weeks. We raised $75,000. Let's go for the B-17 bomber. So they upped it to $300,000. They decided that they were going to try for the Flying Fortress. So they did another, on page 29, they did another poster. They chose to leave the $75,000 poster up because that was great incentive. It has a big paid sign across it. And they pasted the other one below, and of course they had another big assembly. And I believe they involved the parents in this one because the parents, you know, they're the ones with the money. And they decided they're going to go for the $300,000. Now, this time they said, this is a big deal now. We got to open it up to a wider area. So they opened it up to all the southern part of Grand Rapids and hit more businesses, and more banks got involved. And unbelievably, this campaign, they had the assembly on February 12th. On February 26th, 2 weeks later, they had raised $300,000 more, and they had their they decided it would be called the Spirit of South High, and a ceremony was set up. It was to be dedicated on April 6th, and if you see on page 41, starts all the pictures. It was dedicated on April 6th with the governor, the mayor, Mr. Mulder, everybody and anybody who obviously spoke. You know, a lot of dignitaries came in. The commander of Lockbourne Air Force Base came in, and also the general of the Air Force, who was responsible for allowing the plane to come into Grand Rapids, sent a telegram. He could not attend, but he sent a wonderful telegram. It's on. Somebody tell me what page it's on. And you can read it in the book. But he sent a wonderful telegram about students and friends of South High School are to be congratulated upon the tremendous and worthwhile job that has been done in selling more than $375,000 worth of war bonds. The B-17 Flying Fortress that you are to dedicate today will serve as a symbol and an inspiration to our pilot and aircrew members of this great ship that the people back home have not forgotten. So they had this wonderful dedication ceremony. There was a big parade. The kids marched. Actually, they walked. Wow, they walked a mile and 1.7 mile, right, Don? I said, told my brother, get in the car and go from Garfield Park to the old airport and tell me how far these kids walked. And they marched in a big parade from Garfield Park to the airport for the dedication ceremony. Now the dedication ceremony was, you know, they didn't lose a trick. There was a young man who had been stationed at Loch Warren. They brought him back and surprised his wife at the dedication and let him have a 24-hour leave to see his family. They had a section of Gold Star for Gold Star families, and I think you know what a Gold Star family was? It was a family that had already lost a member who was killed during the war. And they had a section for the Gold Star members, and they read a list of all of the students and teachers who had already been killed, who had left for the war. A lot of students left as juniors and seniors. A lot of young men decided it was their duty and lied about their age to get in. It was a whole different time, and the only thing I can have you all relate to is what happened on this day in 2001. The Twin Towers came down, and that feeling of camaraderie and horror and fear and everything else that we all felt together, that was something they lived with in 1944. So, wonderful dedication ceremony. It flew up with the wings and the prayers and the dreams and the hopes of all these young men. 1,500 students from South High, that this bomber was going to win the war. And it flew up, and it was gone, and nobody heard a thing from it. And so from years on, year after year after year, alumni would get together and say, hey, whatever happened to that bomber? So, well, I heard this story, you know, it was in the battle of such, and it killed, and blah, 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 blah. And the stories grew and grew and grew, but nobody knew for sure. So in 1990, a young graduate named Robert Trufflemeyer decided, I'm going to find that bomber. So he went and looked up whatever he could look up, found the sources he could find. He did get to Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, which was the right place to go, and talk to their historians, and they said, well, they would look it up, but they were really backed up and busy, and they weren't sure when they could get to it, so they kind of put him off. Well, 8 months went by, and he said, I'm tired of this. So he decided to call in the big guns, and we all know who the big guns was. The big man who graduated in 1931, our president, Gerald R. Ford. Gerald R. Ford loved South High School. In 1930, he was a captain of the football team. In 1930, there were 30 members of the team. In 1930, they started the 30-30 Club, the football club. And every Thanksgiving Day, up until the mid-50s, there was a game with Union High on Thanksgiving Day. And every morning of Thanksgiving Day, the members of the football team would have breakfast. Well, at some time in the mid-50s, they no longer had that game on Thanksgiving Day, but the football team always met for breakfast on Thanksgiving morning, year after year after year. In fact, when Gerald R. Ford was in the White House, he had the remaining members of his football team to the White House for breakfast, and there are some pictures in the book about that. So we knew that, and Robert Trufflemeyer knew that he was a real devotee to South High School, so he wrote him a letter, and of course, he jumped right, Gerald R. Ford jumped right on it, and ended up finding the bomb. And the word came back, it was used as training. Everyone was so disappointed. What do you mean? It never went to war. It was used as a training ship? Oh my goodness. And worse than that, it was dismantled after the war in Columbus, Ohio. So everyone was deflated, you know, really down. I mean, all these dreams, all these stories, poof, just like that. Well, then jump to 2012. It was my 50th high school reunion. I decided, you know, nobody ever listens during a high school reunion when you have the presentation. I decided my class was going to listen to me. So I put together a history of South High, and they listened, right? They listened. So I got some members here, and they all listened. And so I put together a history of South High, and one of the stories I told was this story about the bomb. But my take on it was, you know, I don't know how many pilots it trained, but wow, it really could have affected the war. If it was a training ship, you know, the B-17 bomber had a typical crew of 10, and if it was used for training, how many crews did it train could very well have made a difference in the war. Well, one of my class members was overheard. He asked that question, and he decided he was going to find the bomber. Oh, he was going to try to find out if he could find out the log for the bomber to discover how many pilots were trained on our bomber. You see, the pictures of our bomber has a serial number on the back. It has a serial number on the tail. So he plugged that into the internet, and he said he did quite a bit of digging, and he never found the log of that. But up popped a site about plane crashes stateside plane crashes during the war. And guess what? There was a serial number of our bomber. And I drove him nuts because I kept emailing him, are you sure this is our bomber? Because if it isn't, I don't want to have that on my face because I started this whole thing. No, it's been assured. This was the spirit of South High. So he then sent for the military record. Well, the military report has all of the crew members. They all gave their version of it, and it had all this wonderful information of it. And he sent me a copy of it. So suddenly, we know what happened to the bomber. It wasn't dismantled in Columbus, Ohio. It was scrapped in Columbus, Ohio for good reason. It had crashed. So 72 years later now, we have the rest of the story, and that's what's in the book. So I could end now, and then we can read the book, but I won't. So I've been sitting on this information for about 3 years as I was finishing a novel, and long about December, well, first of all, it said that the bomber had crashed in Meadows of Dan, Virginia. Now, I live in the mountains of North Carolina, and we often go up 81, up that corridor. And I said to my husband long about December, I wonder where Meadows of Dan is. And so I looked on the map, and here was less than 3 hours from my house. And I took that as a big sign that I should do something about this. So I tried to call Meadows of Dan. Well, you don't call Meadows of Dan, it's a crossroads. There's a wonderful farm market. If you're ever there, you have to go to that farm market. And there's a farm market, a Baptist church, a gas station, grocery store, and a couple of local businesses. But it's just a crossroads. But if you can imagine Virginia, it's very mountainous, it's hilly, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful. And so I thought, okay, so I can't call Meadows of Dan. Who should I call? Well, the Historical Society. They must have a county historical society. So I called the County Historical Society, and I said, I would like information. I said, I'm writing a story about a bomber. I'd like information about the bomber that crashed in your county in 1944. He said, oh, we got a huge display. That B-24 came down, and the crew was killed. And I, wait. No, I'm talking about October. He said, no, it came down in March. I said, no, I have the military records. It said Meadows of Dan, October 1st. It tells me exactly where it was located. He says, I'm 64 years old. I grew up here. I know nothing of this crash. How could you not know of a huge bomber crashes in your neighborhood and you don't know anything about it? So therein came another story.